Hi guys, bienvenidos to Todo, Vida podcast. We are on episode 18, and I just wanted to greet everybody that's coming on. If you're a first-time listener, thank you so much for tuning in. If you are returning, welcome back. Today's topic is going to be about codependency. Now, I've said multiple times on other episodes that I don't speak from a place of an experience that I have not encountered myself or have lived myself. I also talk a lot about how I'm a human being myself, and no matter the platform or the business that I have, I'm still learning, and I'm always willing to have that humility in me to hold myself accountable, say where my errors are, and again, just try to be self-aware. Now, I know that we're all human at the end of the day, and I know that also too, with that comes errors, trials, tribulations, but if I can sit back and learn anything, I'm going to always try to go ahead and do that, because nothing is ever a punishment when it comes from up above. It's never a punishment. It's always a lesson. So let's go ahead. We're going to dig right into it. So I pulled up the actual definition of codependency just so that you guys are aware of what it is. So it's a psychological condition or a relationship in which a person manifesting low self-esteem and a strong desire for approval has an unhealthy attachment to another person and places the needs of that person before his or her own. Now, as you guys heard that, you probably realize that at some point or another, you have experienced codependency. Now, if you were to tell me, oh, you have low self-esteem, I would have been like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. But it took me being in a situation for me to realize codependency. One, that I had it. Two, that where it came from, like where it originated from, how in some sense it's kind of a trauma response, and also to how to correct that, because I don't want anything to have that much power over me. So for starters, with codependency, your entire mood or behavior is based off of the actions of another person. And we have to first and foremost realize that we're not in control of anybody else. However, I just kind of want to break it down, because as I sit here and I talk about it, a lot of you are wondering like, okay, well, how did she even realize that that was an issue for her? How did she correct it? And I know a lot of you guys even listening are like, wow, she's very self-aware. At the end of the day, I'm also human. And sometimes it takes me encountering certain things for me to be able to sit there and learn from them, because I never want something to, again, have that much power over me. So with codependency, I think a lot of us based it in relationships, because let's be real, a family member does something to us, we're quick to cut them off because we're like, why would they do that for us? Why would they do that to us, their family? When it comes to a friend, you're like, you know what? I'd rather have an enemy than to have a friend like that, if that's going to be the case. And where we tend to give time and time and time again the second chance or the third chance is with the relationship, because we tend to see the potential in people. Now, I've said before, do not date potential. But I also, like I said, I'm always open to having that humility, right? Like, I think being humble is really, really good. And I think the reason why sometimes we see the best in other people is because they show us that side. But if someone couldn't talk, would their actions show us how appreciative they really were of us? Would they make us feel important? Would they make us feel like we have some sort of significance in their life through their gratitude and their actions? Probably not. So words are one thing, actions are another. So let me just kind of break down a lot of times why codependency is something that takes place in relationships without even realizing. So first off, let's dissect it down to childhood. I've been very open on this podcast that I did not have a role model or example of a relationship, a happy home growing up, right? I didn't have like the typical parents that were holding hands and kissing and showing affection to one another. I never had that. So ultimately, I've always desired that, right? Another thing too, I'm super, super humble. No matter the business, no matter how much money I make, whatever, I see people for who they are. Sometimes I even see them for who they could be. And I think that that's where I go wrong myself. And I think a lot of us do. However, one thing to pay attention to is that when something is not meant for you, just know that God is going to continue to give you the heavy hand, the hard hand of making the situation get worse and worse, because it's not meant for you. Now, when I was encountering a situation where I wasn't sure if this was meant for me or not, I sat there and I was like, I pray something happens and then things get better. But you guys have to realize that when you are saying that prayer or you're asking God for something, there's two people listening on the other end, right? It's not just God. and things would get worse, and then they would get better, and then they would get worse, and then they would get better. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like this person has the potential to do great things, but it's just, it gets to a point where the bad outweighs the good. All right. And eventually, right, I had to realize, like, why am I not willing to let this person go when I have the capability and the discipline to let go of people that don't serve me purpose, right? It goes back to the trauma of my childhood, wanting to have a family, wanting to have a loving relationship, something I didn't see growing up. And so you kind of just give chance after chance after chance, right? And that's where the codependency takes place, because you're like, you think that because, for example, with me, I was never really given grace. I was never really given the opportunity to have someone just like help me out or see the good in me. You know, now everybody sees the good in me because I have these platforms that are on social media, and people think that that's a source of validation, but that's really not. So before this, though, before all of this, before Self-Care by Ash, before Todo, Vida podcast, I felt invisible, you know, and I think that's something that a lot of us tend to feel, right? So what ended up happening is that, my codependency started to take place, and I figured that maybe if I do for others as I would like done for me, they will reciprocate or appreciate that. And we are not in control of anybody's actions. That doesn't mean that because you do something for them, that doesn't mean that because you show them grace. Of course, always stay true to who you are as a person, but that doesn't sometimes mean, most of the time, doesn't mean that because you deal somebody the cards that you would like dealt to you, that they're going to deal those cards back. So what tends to happen? You start to get lost in confusion. And let's go down to like even science. When you kiss somebody, when you hug them, when you're having any sort of like affection with them, right? You get a dopamine release in your brain. So when you're so used to getting that constant dopamine release in your brain, you can literally go through a withdrawal of a person. Isn't that crazy? Like, you can control your actions, you can control your movements, you can control your body, you can control a lot of things within yourself, minus your emotions. You can't control that, right? So be kind to yourself. If you are listening right now and you're like, dude, yes, like I resonate with what she's saying. I've felt codependency before and I didn't even realize I had it, but that's why it was so hard for me to let somebody go. Or maybe that's why you gave them chance after chance. Now, when you start to experience codependency, I think it's really easy to get lost in it without really realizing it. And then what ends up happening is you're like, all right, well, maybe if I do, a certain thing, I'll get a certain reaction in return of that's based off of gratitude, appreciation, love, reciprocating the fact that this action that you did isn't so that, you can get things your way, but it's just so that way, maybe that person can see your value a little bit more. And somebody can never see your value through actions, because then if not, they're just going to appreciate the hand that you can deal them versus who you are. And speaking from a woman's perspective, I can honestly say that a man's going to see your value whether he wants to or not, but it starts with you. Like, if there's one thing that I could go back and, no mistakes, right? But if there's anything that I can go back on my youth and fix, is like not giving so much attention and pouring into other people, because that's where codependency flips. That's where you become reactive, you become possessive, you become almost controlling, because you're like, hey, I'm doing these actions for you in hopes that you're going to be able to reciprocate it or at least appreciate it. And that's not what happens. And then what happens is their actions contradict their words. And you know in your heart to not trust that, but you're like, I still have hope. But the way that I'm going to have hope and solidify that hope is because I want to have control. Like, I'll give you an example. When a partner cheats on you, right? You know that act wasn't of a place of love, right? But their words are telling you, I love you. I'm sorry. I fucked up. I want to be with you. So then it's, let me get the passwords to your phone. Let me get the logins to your social medias. And it's like, nah. And that's where codependency, I feel like it kind of starts as a seed, right? And then it starts to get watered. And how that starts to get watered is because you're doing things in hopes that your actions are appreciated or reciprocated. And then when they're not, it it kind of starts blooming and growing against you because you're like, dude, I'm being possessive, or I'm being controlling, or I'm doing things that aren't of my character. And that's what really made me realize and become self-aware that I had codependency, that I was like, oh my gosh, this is not who I am. And if anybody saw the way that I was acting behind closed doors, this would not be a representation of who I truly am to the core as a person. So that's what really made me wake up and be like, what is this? What am I feeling? And I'm the type that I don't like sitting in my errors. I don't like sitting and not feeling like myself. So I like to try to be self-aware. I try to find the answers. And I'm human, guys. We all sometimes don't have the answers ourselves. That's where, God sends us our tribe, and maybe they can give us some insight. But ultimately, it's up to you to sit there with yourself and really realize where this is originating from, where this is rooted from. And so that's what I have to say about codependency, right? Like it starts off even down to your trauma. And I think that with me growing up, I had a little bit of everything. I wasn't really financially stable. My family wasn't. I didn't have an example of a loving partnership through my parents. I didn't really have a family-oriented foundation. So these are all great things that I want. However, where it starts to come, or like I said, it starts to bloom against you, right? The seed of codependency is when you start to do these things and you realize that the person is simply not reciprocating it, right? So that's when the negative things start to happen. Like I stated, the controlling and being possessive and stuff like that. And that's where you start to have hope and faith that this person is going to do what they say that they're going to do. And the reason why I'm speaking about relationships, like I stated earlier in this episode, is because do you guys notice? Like, it's super easy for us to like not talk to our family member after they make an error. So easy for us to cut off a friend because, why do we need them around? But then you share these moments with somebody behind closed doors and you truly feel like you know them. So you feel as though they're not capable of doing the things that in the end, they end up doing, because you see one side to them and it's such a mind fuck. It really, really is, because you're like, I'm seeing two sides of you. Your actions are showing me one thing, but your words are telling me another. And those are one things that we can control, our emotions, be kind to yourself, but also to know when to walk away, because you're going to start to pour from an empty cup and then you're going to become the problem. And then that's where your codependency starts to almost get like, there's a saying in Spanish, un cuchillo de doble filo. I mean, it's like a double-ended sword or a double-ended knife, right? Double-edged sword. There you go. Thank you, Mama. But yeah, it kind of starts to be used against you, because now the person knows that you're not going to stop pouring in them, right? They know you're not going to stop pouring into them because you care about them so much. And they know that you're not going to walk away, but they also know that you're reacting to their actions. So then what becomes the problem? What they did to cause you to react, or your reaction? It's almost like your reaction seems to be more of a problem than what they did. Now, let's be completely transparent here and let's hold ourselves accountable. Nobody is responsible for the way that you react to things, but it gets to a point where you have to be self-aware and be like, whoa, what was I doing? Is that of my character? Is that who I truly am? And if there's anybody out there that's listening right now that I'm currently taking this advice myself, right? Is like, do you really want to be loved like that for the rest of your life? Like, are you okay with being loved like that for the rest of your life? Because at the end of the day, it's like having a relationship is not all just butterflies and rainbows. You have to be able to grow with that person. You have to be able to problem solve with that person. You have to be able to go through bad days with that person, because everything is amazing and rainbows when there's good times, there's money in the bank, and, everything's going well. But I think the bad days define a relationship more than the good days do, honestly. So I wanted to touch on codependency because I know that that's something that not a lot of people are aware of. And I know that a lot of people that are listening right now, they probably think like, wow, she's so self-aware. Guys, it literally took me being in a position of being codependent on another person, because I'm like, I could see myself having a family with this person. I can see myself being a part of this person's family. And I know that's where probably my downfall is like, for years now, right? My outlet has been a little bit of everything. Has been working till I can't no more because, I used to say all gas, no brakes. I'd rather be, have money in the bank and be sad than broke and be sad and whatever, right? And then I started to realize like, this is taking a toll on my body working the way that I'm working. And it's not filling my cup anymore. It's not being able to suppress me processing my emotions. And then it was like, well, I'm just going to smoke some weed. And, and I smoked weed for 10 years. Right. And I was like, this isn't working anymore. My mind's not stopping. So then what happens? I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm going to work on myself for a little bit. And I did. And then, with respect to this person, I'm not going to, talk about them or anything, but, I was like, you know what? Okay. Like I could see myself doing this. Like I can see myself giving this another shot, And I did. And I realized that had I finished working on myself, I would be a more whole version of myself, and I would know what to accept and what not to accept, because this is where codependency can take place, right? I'm going to give you an example, right? And I know this is like, whatever, it's exaggerated example, but just so you guys get it, okay? If the person if you yourself, right, you have like a bucket, you're in debt, and by bucket I mean like your car's not reliable, you're in debt, or like you got 3 baby daddies, you're going to be willing to settle with someone that's just as bad in debt, doesn't have a reliable car either. You're like, oh, we're going to ride to the bus stop together, or you're willing to settle for someone that has the same cards that you can deal them, right? But if you're someone that has done the work on yourself mentally, and there's layers to it, there's really layers to it to avoid being in a situation of codependency, right? Sometimes people are codependent because they cannot financially do it on their own. So they depend on another person, right? Or they stay in a situation because that person can provide for them. So then it's like that. You have to unlock the ability to be able to provide for yourself financially. But then you get to another point of like, okay, well, from I think like 17 to like 23, 24, it's like survival mode. You're trying to figure out who you are as a person. You're trying to establish yourself. I got lucky enough to be able to establish myself at a pretty young age, but that doesn't mean that my self-growth or my self-development is done at that point. And I think a lot of the audience can hear right now that even as I get older, I'm not gonna be done working on myself. So the taste that I have in people or the things that I want out of life are going to continue to change. And the first thing that I did was I ran to church. That's the first thing that I did. The second thing I did, actually, no, opposite. First thing I did was sign up for therapy. Second thing I did was run to church. And I am honest enough, because I don't throw the rock and hide my hand. I looked for different outlets to try to like subside that pain and like that withdrawal of being codependent on a person. And then now having to go back to my reality of like, it's just me, But I will say this. I learned to be appreciative of the season that I'm in, because guys, I get to go home to like my own house. I get to fall in love with like pouring some TLC into my home, cooking myself a dinner, taking the dogs on a walk, finding different outlets that maybe are not going to be short-term like fulfillment, but in the long run, they will. And I think the last thing I need to start to do right now is like really like pour my all into being offline a little bit. Obviously, I'm going to do the podcast, and obviously I have my business page, but as far as my personal life goes, kind of want to be like hidden for a little bit, because seeing a situation to make me that vulnerable, and guys, like I'm being as honest as I can right now. I'm being as transparent as I possibly can. I was just married 2 years ago. That shit didn't work out. What happened? I poured into the wrong person. Then a year and a half later, I give another opportunity and it doesn't work out. I'm not going to sit here and blame people and be like, oh, they're the problem. Come on, Ash, take a look at yourself. I'm not saying I'm a bad person. I'm not saying I don't have the capability to be in a relationship, but I'm like, you are not done working on yourself. And sometimes You tend to see the potential in people and you extend a hand that is never extended to you in hopes that they will be able to like do right by it. And I don't need people to do right by me no more. I need to do right by myself. And I need to fall in love with the season of being by myself. It's easier said than done. And I think that that's the hardest part with staying consistent with that, is that it's not a in the moment fulfillment. Like, people hear like, oh, well, you know, you're feeling some type of way, go to the gym. You're like, I'm fucking tired, dude. I don't want to go run 3 miles right now. But you know, when you start to build that consistency, maybe it will make you feel better. Maybe you'll end up looking in the mirror and seeing what you like, and it's going to boost your confidence, and it's going to make you realize like, hey, these are things that I'm capable of. Not to say that going to the gym and getting fit is what determines your value, but it definitely does something to you mentally. You know, I was there a few years ago and I really, really liked that place that I was in. And I can tell that my confidence radiated at an all-time high. And that allowed me to not settle for things, because then what happens is, even in the act of codependency, right? You give somebody the opportunity because you think that they'll do right by it. And then what ends up happening is that you realize that you were never really done working on yourself. And you realize that this is not something that you should have settled for to begin with. Maybe that'll be somebody else's cup of tea, you know? But as far as for me, I don't know what I want exactly. Not as far as relationships goes, but like just life in general. But I do know what I don't want. And until then, I'm willing to say no to anything that isn't that. And, you know, I know that this conversation of codependency is based around relationships, because that is where I found out about my codependency. But sometimes people have codependency too with like parents, of like trying to pour into them and trying to give them the life that maybe they never had too growing up. And we see that sometimes our parents don't tend to appreciate, you know, while some people are blessed with parents that pour into them and make sure that they're good. I think that, you know, growing up in this generation, my generation at least, I was born in 1997, but our parents are the last generation that didn't really have any sense of awareness as far as like mental health goes. So I didn't want to just dive too much into the topic of like just relationships when it comes to codependency. Now, what works for me might not work for everybody else, but that's what worked for me. And I also had to realize that I did try to like find distractions, you know, where I'm like, I'm young, like I want to go on dates. Like I want, you know, that for myself. But then I'm also like, let me enjoy this season that I'm in, because it's not going to be forever. I do know that one day I will get that happy ending. And I know that one day that will happen. But the more you look for it, the less you get it. And I think that after having a talk with God and just telling him like, look, I will pour into this season of myself, you know. Me and him had a little chat or whatever, and I made a promise with him, you know, and I'm going to fulfill that. But what I'm just trying to tell you guys is try to be self-aware if you're currently in a relationship, or just in any, it could be a relationship with a parent. It could be a relationship with a sibling, that you try to extend a hand that, you know, that if it was vice versa, it was being extended to you, you would take advantage of it in the best way possible to level up in life. That doesn't mean, guys, that you're going to get that in return, you know? And as far as too, like when you experience codependency in relationships, it comes down to your childhood trauma, what you didn't have growing up, what you're looking for now as an adult, what you desire to have. And that codependency can tend to be used against you when you see that somebody's actions contradict their words. And to you, it doesn't register, because when you're not, this is something that I always tell my clients or my friends when they experience really messed up situations. They say, but why did this person do this? Why did this person? It's not your job to understand, because you're not cut from the same cloth. You cannot understand the actions of someone who is irresponsible or malicious, because you don't have that embedded in you. You don't come from a place that's malicious or dishonest, you know? Granted, we all have our faults, we all have our errors, but to sit there and say that I'm willing to look you in the eye and tell you that the sky is green and the grass is blue, knowing damn well that the grass is green and the sky is blue, you know? And I think it tends to hurt a little bit more. And that's why maybe it's harder for us to process things, because we don't have the capability of doing that to somebody else. But I've asked myself, coming this far, you know, have been married and it didn't work out. And, you know, even to the person who I got married to, like, I asked myself, like, Ash, if you could do anything different, what would you do? And I'm like, I would have just protected my light. I would have protected my sunshine a little bit more, because that's the one thing you can control are your emotions. And when you lose that, it's really, really hard to gain it back. And you have to find ways to be able to gain it back. And when you do, the way that you gain it back is not through short-term fulfillment. It's through long-term fulfillment. And that's hard work right there. So maybe being a little bit more selective, you know, I want to go into a season of just kind of dedicating like a solid 5 months off of Instagram and really like telling God, like, help me get through those 5 months, because it's so easy to log in and post your successes, but nobody posts their failures. Do you notice that the people that do the best are people that keep to themselves and don't post anything and they're just offline? Now, I'm not saying that social media determines my emotions or nothing like that, but there's a beauty in privacy. And I want to gain that, you know? And it's a process. Be kind to yourself if you are experiencing codependency, because it's not something that's overnight you just get rid of or you just get over. It doesn't work like that, you know? So I know you guys listening right now, you're like, wow, she's so aware. She's so spot on. Guys, it takes experiences to learn. And I think that's the beautiful part about age. And like, as we get older, is we tend to learn, and we know how to maneuver our life a little bit better. You know, I'm really, really praying for like a fresh start right now, because that's always good to have, right? Whether the fresh start is like a new place, staying offline for a little bit, there's a beauty in privacy. And I really, really want to keep that to myself. I already post like on my TikTok, and I have my podcast where I'm very, very vulnerable on. But then I also have my business page, and I'm a service provider. And that's another thing too. It's like when you're codependent of a person, essentially it's the act of pouring into this person, right? You're pouring into them, or you're filling their cup. And from where do you fill somebody else's cup? From your own cup. So when you are constantly pouring out of your cup and nothing's ever coming back in, on top of me being a service provider, I get burnt out. And mentally, I have to be intact because I'm a service provider. I run a business. There's nobody that I can call as like a backup, and that's okay. But that should be even more of a reason why I keep myself intact mentally and emotionally. And I'm more selective. And yes, I always say forever humble, but I think it's okay to know your value too. It's okay to know your worth also, because if you don't, who else is? And your value is not based on a business. My value is not even based off this podcast. My value is based off of my emotional and mental maturity and control. Because you can have all the money in the world. If you can't even control your emotions, you're not a high value person. That's like, it literally said in the definition of codependency, that's low self-esteem. And it's like, you would think, right? Having a house and a car and a platform on social media, that automatically makes you high value. And it's like, no. I think like artificially to social media it does, but internally it doesn't. You know, you can't even control your emotions or have enough value to know when to walk away from things. It's going to continue to get worse. Like, I see it time and time again. And I also had to realize like what I'm doing is not working. Pouring into other people as much as I do is not working. And I think when you are rooted from a good-hearted place, we all tend to do that sometimes. We pour out and we pour out and we pour out. But it's like, something's got to change. Something's got to change. And I think right now that me going to that season of isolation is going to be my change. And I really just pray. I pray that I can go ahead and get through it. And I pray that you guys can get through it as well, because I like to come onto this podcast and to a certain extent desahogarme, which just means kind of like talk to you guys, let you guys know. I've always asked God to place in my heart the topics that either I can resonate with or that I'm learning from, you know? And it's crazy because a few episodes back, right, I talked about like self-sabotage. And while I definitely think that that's real, self-sabotage, I can also see now how a woman has intuition. And like, listen, if you are a woman and you have intuition, listen, because 10 out of 10, it's not that you're tripping. You feel it in your heart for a reason. And that's something I will give men that. Men have the gift of like being rational, and they don't really involve their emotions too much into things, versus women, we're so emotional and we react based off of emotion, but we also have a gift that they don't have, and that's called women's intuition. So yeah, like if you feel it in your heart, right? And you, or even now, if you're wondering like, is this person meant to be my life in the long run? That can mean relationship. That can mean, I don't know, right now, maybe there's a season where you and a family member are not getting along. Just pray for them. Pray for them. And maybe they will come back around, but that doesn't mean that when they come back around, you're going to be the same person, you know? And that's what I truly hope for with myself. Because when I learned that I was codependent, I was like, whoa, I've built too much. I've done too much. And I know that I was raised to love myself more than this. So I like to be vulnerable. I like to be open and transparent with you guys on this podcast, because I'm not a role model. I'm just a person that's like learning along the way. And I'm learning things that I think at one point we all encounter, because anybody else would have read the definition of codependency. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't have low self-esteem. So what does it mean when you can't even control your emotions? That you didn't have low self-esteem, or you weren't lacking somewhere, you would know how to control them and when to walk away. And I think that that is like the true riches of life, is being at peace with yourself, is having your emotions in check. And it's okay. Sometimes it takes you not having them in check, or having that emotional and mental discipline. And that's okay, as long as you learn from it though, because you can't keep doing the same thing. And at one point you have to get to realizing that maybe the same thing that you're doing is not working. And the more you give, the less you get sometimes. And I'm not saying change your heart. I'm not saying that. Just be more selective who you give it to. Be more selective and see, like, I don't want to give someone what they can't even give themselves, because chances are you're able to give it to yourself, and that person, they got to be able to give it to themselves, you know? And I don't think anybody that's on the other end of your codependency is a bad person. I really don't. I don't think that they're a bad person. I just think that there must be some sort of irresponsibility, or just not valuing you, not realizing your worth. But you can't make anybody realize your value. You can't make anybody realize your worth. And the more that you sit there and stay in the energy of like, I would really like this person to come back around and see that I'm a good-hearted person, you can't do that. Life is going to show them, because chances are they're probably going to get confronted after you with people of low quality, everything, the way that they move, the way that their heart is. And maybe then they'll realize, but by then that doesn't mean that you're going to be on the same page as them, you know, or want the same things that you did when you were with them. So I just wanted to touch on that topic today, guys, because again, it was something that I was learning, and I was talking about it with my clients prior to me shooting this episode. I was like, you know, they're like, I love your episodes and you're so self-aware. And I'm like, no. I speak on things that I've learned or am learning along the way. And I also want to be able to give you guys tools how to be able to get out of that, because we tend, right? Our flesh tends to look and kind of like, when we're going through that like dopamine withdrawal, right, from a person or whatever, we tend to scatter and try to find short-term fulfillment, and we don't know what to do. And that can sometimes lead us to destruction. So we have to be able to be willing to do the work long-term because there's more fulfillment in that. And you're not going to get it right away, but there's going to be more fulfillment in that than doing something that is just going to make you feel good in the moment. And that's not what I want you guys to do, honestly. If you guys have faith, I definitely recommend going to church. I'm not like a Bible thumper. I'm not like, like someone that knows the verses in and out of the Bible. Like, I'm not perfect, but I try to be aware, and I try to learn, and I try to educate myself, because faith teaches you a lot about forgiveness. Faith teaches you a lot about, holding yourself accountable and seeing that sometimes the action that people take towards you is not based off of you. It's a reflection of themselves. So don't sit there and beat yourself up about that. And that's something that I'm having to learn myself, because I get stuck too, and they're like, why would they do that? Did they think that that was okay? Why didn't they think that that would hurt me? Why? I don't think that people, they can't even be aware of the consequence that they're bringing onto themselves for fucking over a good person. I don't think that they're going to be aware as to what they do to you. Because if they were aware, they would realize, like, in the long run, I'm going to lose a good thing. So how can they be aware of how that's going to make you feel when they're not even aware of the fact that it's going to affect them negatively? So it's not our job to understand. And if there's something that I'm telling myself as I go through the disconnect of codependency, is to not give it too much of my energy, because it can really bring on a lot as far as like depression or just putting you in a bad place. And that's not a place that you want to be. I personally don't want to be there. I have a business to run. I got shit to do. I got bills to pay, and I got moves to make. So for you, it's like, whatever it is, if you have to sit there and still be a mom, if you have to sit there and still show up at work, if you have to sit there and still, show up in your career or whatever it is, be present for your family members. It's like, don't let something consume you so bad, and be kind to yourself and show yourself grace, because emotions are not something that we can control. So look for your outlet that's going to get you out of that codependency, and just know that there's short-term fulfillment as far as outlets go, and there's long-term fulfillment. And what may work for me may not work for you guys, but it's the act of being self-aware. It's the act of sitting with yourself and realizing what is going to make me feel better. Yeah, I think that I was really, really hard on myself when that happened, because my reaction became more of a problem than the actions itself that were causing me to react. But that's where I'm a big girl, and I can realize, like, nobody should, or nothing should have that much control over my own emotions. So if anybody's out there listening right now and they see that this podcast is a form of like answers, just know, like, I'm figuring it out along the way too. And I'm trying to share my experiences with you so you don't feel so alone. Trying to share the way that I was able to cope or get myself out of that situation, right? Because it is a withdrawal. Like, you go from feeling this dopamine to your brain for how many months straight, and then you don't feel it anymore. It's a big change, but you got to keep going. Life, the clock never ticks backwards. As cliche as that may sound, it's true. You're never going to be as young as you currently are right now. You're never going to have the opportunities that you currently have. So take advantage. And I also think that experiencing the losses that I've had, and I think that that was the beauty in death, that it taught me to appreciate every second of life. It taught me that everything in this life es prestado, meaning that it's borrowed. We're on borrowed time. These experiences that we have with people are borrowed. It's nothing that's going to last forever. So utilize every moment that you have. And even if along the way you make an error, just learn from it. Rewrite your story. You're not your errors, It's what you do with them. It's how you correct yourself and become self-aware that really makes a difference, So I hope that you guys were able to take something from this episode. Just know that anytime I film one of these episodes, it's either something that I'm currently living or I'm trying to learn from. And be kind to yourself. That's my number one thing, is like, be kind to yourself. I'm someone that I love to hold myself accountable, because growing up, I didn't really have a lot of room to mess up. And I didn't have a backup plan where I could mess up and somebody would come save me. So, lastly, don't ever let this world change your heart. Just be more selective who you give it to, and also to pour into yourself. Like I said, we're never going to be this young. And you just have to try to utilize every moment, because we all have a time clock that's ticking and we don't know when it's going to run out. So please take something from this episode. Don't be so hard on yourself, and also know that we're all learning along the way, no matter the age, no matter what. Maybe it's your first time experiencing it. Maybe it's your second time. However, there has to be a change made. So other than that, make sure you guys tune into Todo Vida podcast. Whether or not you guys are following us on YouTube, we have Todo Vida podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and also Instagram. If you guys want, go ahead, follow my business page, Self Care by Ash LLC. I'm definitely always willing to meeting new clients. I'm always open to new clients. And if you guys don't know what I do, I'm a Brazilian wax specialist that is based out of Southern California, here in downtown Ontario. And girl, same way we be having these therapy sessions on the podcast, we also have them within the four walls of my treatment room. And there's times where I can learn from you guys. There's times where you guys can learn from me. Nevertheless, we're all learning along the way. Be kind to yourself. Try to be self-aware, and don't pour into things that no longer serve you purpose. Because when you say the prayer of removal and you don't listen, little thing I want to add at the end, when you go ahead and pray the prayer of removal and you're not ready to listen, because I wasn't ready to listen, I got presented with the prayer of removal being executed, right? And I didn't listen. So when I saw that I didn't have the willpower to listen and be faithful to what God was showing me, I asked God, remove me, because I don't have the strength to walk away. So because I can't, please remove me. And he did. And God is going to deliver every single time. So with that being said, I love you guys. Thank you guys so much for tuning into Todo Vida podcast. And yes, I can't wait to see what the next episode brings. Hopefully it's something more love and light, but nevertheless, we got to learn from this. And thank you guys so much for tuning in. Make sure you guys follow us, Todo Vida podcast, follow Self Care by Ash, and come get a wax, something, even para conocerme. I would love to meet you guys. Thank you. Talk to you guys later.